You're listening to a Life in Quebec podcast. For more, visit lifeinquebec.com.
Empress of Ireland, The Forgotten Loss. This is a recording of an article that first appeared in the March 2016 issue of Life in Quebec Magazine. This article was written by Mark Lindenberg. Can you imagine, in today's climate of 24-hour news and information, not knowing about the largest maritime disaster in Canada's history? For decades, relatively few Canadians have known of the sinking of the Empress of Ireland. Rammed by the Norwegian-built collier Storstad on the night of May 29, 1914, in heavy fog on the St. Lawrence River, the Empress of Ireland suffered irreparable damage. Captain Henry George Kendall attempted to save as many of those aboard as possible. Still, 1,012 crew and passengers perished when the ship went down. Bound for Liverpool, England, from the port of Quebec, the ship only took 14 minutes to sink in 130 feet of water off Pointe-au-Père near Rimouski. The town's French-speaking inhabitants provided aid and comfort to survivors. Some of those who died that night included Lawrence Irving, an English author and playwright, Sir Henry Seton Karr, a British MP, and James and Ellen Faulkner, a married couple with 10 children, originally from Wolverhampton. One of the couple's great-great-granddaughters, Laurie Pierce, now lives in Quebec City. Pierce's grandmother became her link to the past. Nell Pierce, a widow, lived with Laurie Pierce's parents for 41 years, sharing an adjoining bedroom with and helping to raise her granddaughter. Laurie was the only girl in a family of boys, which strengthened her bond with Nell. She would not talk much about her early life, Laurie Pierce recalls. 2 years after losing her grandparents aboard the ocean-going Empress, Nell lost her father when he and 6 of the men of the family left their new home in London, Ontario, to fight in the First World War. She was 15 at the time. She carried these memories silently and with a heavy heart. As a child, I did not know the extent of her sadness, her granddaughter says. The family tragedies were topics of conversation the adults did not address. Nor did Laurie and her classmates learn about the largest maritime disaster in Canadian history at school. In 1964, Laurie Pierce's grandmother pointed out an article in a weekend newspaper supplement commemorating the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Empress of Ireland. Laurie was 13 at the time, the same age her grandmother had been at the time of the sinking. I carry this knowledge as a personal loss, she says. I quietly despaired that no one would understand the impact the sinking had on so many families. In 1992, 78 years after the Empress sank to the bottom of the St. Lawrence River, Laurie Pierce, who was living in Vancouver at the time, met Lorraine Rouleau, who grew up in Saint-Angèle-de-Médicis, 45 kilometres from Rimouski, the town nearest the disaster site. Rouleau doesn't remember how old she was when she learned of the vessel's fate. I'd not started school yet. I saw the name Empress of Ireland on a plaque. I asked my mother what it meant, Rouleau says. She told me the ship was down there and that people drowned. Her parents were teenagers at the time of the disaster. The church and the people of the town took in survivors, giving them food, clothing and whatever else they could. After my mother died, we didn't talk about it. But the community did not forget. The tragedy is memorialised in songs such as Cerise Dufour's La Catastrophe de l'Empress of Ireland and A.S. de Pierreville and Phyllis Champagne's evocative and terrifying Le Naufrage de l'Empress of Ireland, neither of which recoil from the horror of that night, and both of which hint at the Catholic faith that may have helped rescuers deal with the extent of the tragedy. There were only 465 survivors. Pierce feels that her and Rouleau's mutual connection to this relatively unknown national catastrophe strengthened their friendship beyond the everyday. Rousseau not only knew about the event but was part of a community that had participated in the rescue efforts. Those rescue efforts made it possible for my great-great-grandmother's body to be identified and sent home for burial, Pierce says. Rimouski's strong collective memory of the event means that Pierce's great-great-grandparents and others still entombed in the Empress's final resting place will not be forgotten. The Musée de la Mer, originally founded in 1980 near Rimouski, is now the Pointe-au-Père Maritime Historic Site, where the sunken vessel's story is still told and its artefacts preserved. With the 100th anniversary of the sinking in May 2014, knowledge of its personal effect on people like Laurie Pierce is becoming more widely known. Between May 2014 and April 2015, 265,000 visitors attended the Empress of Ireland Memorial Exhibition at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau. But the Empress's memory is not without controversy. Money paid by the Canadian Museum of History to diver and private collector Philip Baudry for hundreds of artefacts from the ship prompted several museum staff to raise ethical questions in a 2012 letter to the institution's executive committee, 3 months before the collection was bought. Among the issues, would paying money for archaeological objects motivate plundering for profit? Some worried that the answer was yes. Others did not want to chance losing an important part of Canada's heritage. According to a January 2016 article in the Journal de Montréal, the legal stance was that Baudry's years-long recovery effort was undertaken at a time when the wreck was not protected by Canadian or Quebec law. When I first learned that divers were visiting the wreckage, I had a very negative reaction. This was, after all, my ancestors' burial site, says Laurie Pierce. In the past 10 years, I've been involved closely with museum education. I am thankful that these artefacts have been retrieved.
Thank you for listening to a Life in Quebec podcast. For more news, editorials, and opinion, visit lifeinquebec.com.